Our next guest is apparently easily confused with Angelina Jolie, which is weird because Sal Khan is in fact a hedge fund manager turned teacher. Many of you will know him as one of the world's most famous and influential teachers. That's because he has completely rethought the way we educate ourselves. Sal is founder of the Khan Academy, a not-for-profit with this not-so-modest mission, providing a free world-class education to anyone, anywhere. Sal joins us now to share what he has learned along the way about how people learn. He'll be speaking with James Bennet, editor-in-chief of The Atlantic.
Wow. Is that I'm sure you've been compared to Horace Mann and Bill Gates and others over the years. Is the Angelina Jolie comparison a new one on you, or is that?
Yes, as stretched as the metaphor is, I appreciate it, though. I think it's the hair.
It's got to be the hair.
That would make my wife Brad Pitt. I don't know.
All right, I'm hoping we'll talk about how you developed your approach to education, what you've learned about how we learn, maybe what the secrets of educational attainment are, and I hope the future of education before we open up to the audience for questions. But to start us off, I know you brought a video, so maybe we could roll that first. Give us some idea of where Khan Academy is today. If we can roll it.
We can integrate over the surface, and the notation usually is a capital sigma. All these interactions are just due to the gravity over interstellar, or almost you could call it intergalactic. This animal's fossils are only found in this area of South America. A nice clean band here. Notice this is an aldehyde, and it's an alcohol. Ours is there, 30 million, plus the $20 million from the American manufacturer. They create a Committee of Public Safety, which sounds like a very nice committee.
This is not Eve.
No, Botticelli's portrayed the ancient goddess of love.
This is 6 times 6 times 6, or 216.
I'm told the humidity makes it feel hotter. Why is this?
Excellent question, LeBron.
I'll define the function up here and call it total darts.
Play with the pendulum and get a feel for how it moves. If this does not blow your mind, then you have
That actually gives us a very good place to start. You famously began tutoring a cousin in 2003 over the internet. 3 years later, you began putting videos online on YouTube at the suggestion of a friend. 3 years after that, you took the big gamble and started doing it full time. So maybe you could, to go with that video, give us a sort of statistical portrait of 5 years later. Where is Khan Academy today?
Yeah, and even that video, I think that's kind of what people most associate with Khan Academy, and even from that kind of 2006 to I would say 2010 period, it's kind of what put us on the map, what people notice us for. But ever since 2010, what we've really been focusing on is, and we've continued to obviously create more content, but think more deeply about how do you engage students, how do you give them exercises, feedback, assessment, game mechanics, so that they can optimally go down their learning edge. So, we view ourselves more, we definitely are still a content organization, but we're equally as much, if not more so, I would say a software organization or a learning kind of technology company. In terms of where we are now, we have, I think the latest numbers are 20 million registered users. I think 14 or 15 million come on a regular basis, on a monthly basis. We have our team. It's much more than just me now. We have 80 full-time folks, and we have contractors, educators who are helping us make a lot of the content. We have actually thousands of volunteers who are helping us internationalize things. And obviously there's hundreds of thousands of teachers and parents who are actually using us as well. So it's become a much larger enterprise than a guy in his closet with his cousin.
Do you consider heavy usage now to be monthly?
Well, we have different degrees. Yeah. There literally are, on an annual basis, I think, this year we're probably going to cross, 100 million people are going to come this year. Now, a lot of those folks are, I guess for lack of a word, you could call them a transactional user. That one moment where they have an exam tomorrow on photosynthesis, they go to Khan Academy, and that might be their time of the year. And even that could be, that could be the thing that keeps them in their major or not in their major. So even that could be pretty powerful for them. But we look at monthly users, then we look at highly engaged users on a month, 4 times per month, and then we look at people even deeper down the engagement ladder. So it's all of the above.
So given the years you've been watching now, people use the technology, use the videos, what have you learned about patterns in how they actually digest the material? What really engages them? What keeps them going? What keeps them diving back in for more?
Yeah, and this is something, there's no, we don't know like the answer for sure now. And I
Yeah.
think in the last few months and hopefully in the next few years, we're starting to dig much deeper analytically into some of these questions of like, can we actually identify what are the variables that make someone more engaged or more likely to stick through with something, have the right learning mindset, which is something we're starting to invest a lot in. Anecdotally, kind of since inception, I think what we hear is that the comfort level, the ability to kind of learn without feeling judged is a huge thing. I think we've all tried to learn while feeling judged, which is a very difficult thing to do. The immediacy of it, being able to access it when you need it, at your own time, at your own pace. The ability to remediate gaps, a big part of our software platform. I don't know what the singular, our thesis, or plural for thesis. Theses. You're the
92.
Yes. One of our theses is that the reason why so many people have trouble, especially with a lot of STEM subjects, is they go into an algebra class. It's not necessarily that they can't understand algebra. It's that they have gaps in pre-algebra. They didn't fully understand exponents or logarithms or negative numbers, or they're in a calculus class and they never fully understood algebra. And so a big part of what we do is create the tools so a student can go in and essentially do gap analysis and start identifying what are their gaps in their knowledge and identify and work on those and then build a strong foundation. So yeah, it's all of the above. Being approachable, being human, access it on your own terms, no judgment, and then access what's important to you and making sure you have a strong foundation.
I just have to pause for a moment and say parenthetically, that was a huge moment for me that I got to supply you a grammatical tip.
Oh no, you would be, grammar is not my...
I don't know if this is true for anybody else in the audience. Sal's voice is a huge element in my own household. My kids use the products, and we're very grateful to you for that. And I one of the, I think, goals of our education system and our evolving education system is certainly to produce more Sal Khans. And I think it would be interesting to know kind of how you got switched on in the first place. Like, was there a moment in your childhood, an educational experience that you had that just kind of moved you into the kind of growth mode, set your curiosity on fire?
Yeah, and it's not an unambiguous positive that there were more Sal Khan, so we'll just put that aside. But as my mother will tell you,
more Angelina Jolie's too.
Yes, well, we could think about that. But I don't know. You could probably survey most of the people in this room. You can't really pinpoint the moment. I think when I really think in hindsight, I remember there was in first grade. So my sister, who was 3 years older than me, was just this naturally precocious, gifted person. She was in the gifted classes and all that. And then when I was in first grade, I was in speech therapy because I just couldn't speak properly. And I thought it was gifted because it seemed very similar to what my sister was doing. And because they took you out of class and you got this one-on-one attention and they played tapes for you. And actually, I thought that was a confidence boost for me because it actually made me feel special to be in speech therapy because I got that attention. And then the next year, I think because I was Farah's younger brother, they said, well, there must be something here. And I think there, and that tells you a lot because what people project on you is what you end up projecting onto yourself. And so, they kind of tested me for, at the time, it was called, this was in the suburban New Orleans, the gifted program, and I got in, I think really on my sister's coattails. And I remember that first day, I remember second grade, and I remember very little else from second grade, but I remember the first day of that program where they took you out of your regular scheduled classes, a different class every day of the week. And I went to this room, and there were these two women sitting at desks, Miss Krause and Miss Roussel. It didn't look anything like a traditional classroom. There was a couple of kids in a corner doing an art project, another couple of kids playing some, Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego? A couple of kids were playing chess, all different age groups. And I remember walking up to them, looking for direction, and she's like, oh, yeah, hey, I heard you were part of the program. What do you want to do? And I was like, I'm 7. Why are you asking me what I want to do? And they're like, no, what do you like to do? And I was like, I like to draw. I like puzzles. And I literally remember this conversation from when I was 7. And then I remember Miss Roussel saying, okay, then we'll draw. Then we'll do some puzzles. And for the next year, I was in that program throughout elementary school, and it changed a little bit in middle school, but I thought it was the biggest racket. I thought I was getting away with something. I was like, this can't be real school. No one should know about this thing. This is a big treat. But when I look back now, that's where I learned most of what I now really apply in my life, whether it's just being able to maybe think in a broader context, being able to work with folks, a lot of, what I kind of talk about what schools should look like, I think comes from that experience with Ms. Krause and Ms. Roussel.
So you went to Harvard then, and as I've read that you managed to earn, I think, 2 BAs and a master's in 4 years, right?
I went to MIT.
MIT.
Yeah, people would
I get those schools mixed up.
Yes, they're different.
Was that applying the same, what was your method? What method did you apply to your own education that enabled you to pack so much in so little time?
I think I was, it's a strange thing that I was somewhat lucky in high school to go to, it wasn't a bad high school, but it wasn't I guess you could say it was a fairly typical high school. And I got exposed really through kind of these math competitions and things. I started getting exposed to kids who were going to kind of the really hard-charging high schools. And I saw, wow, some of these kids are my age, but they're 1 or 2 grade levels ahead of me in math, or they're, this, or they're doing all this. And that started to open my mind of like, wow, maybe I don't have to just kind of passively wait for the system to happen to me, and I could be more proactive about it. So even in high school, I started getting more proactive about things. And by the time I went to college, I think there was this lens, and frankly, there was a lot of people I went to college with. The president of our organization, Shantanu, he's actually one of those people that I met in 10th grade who beat me in a math competition. It opened my mind that I had to up my game. But then he became my freshman year roommate at MIT, and we kind of, if you looked at kind of this college-going process as a system, you started to realize that okay, there were some rituals to it which weren't necessarily optimal, and one of those rituals were attend class every day, and so you start to realize, wow, if instead of going to that 300-person lecture hall, I go to the library and study, or actually just do something else and then study later, or whatever it might be, actually is a better use of your time oftentimes.
That's a deeply subversive idea.
It is.
We're taught to go to class every day and show up on time.
You are told to do that, but it's a subversive idea, but you actually get very little pushback on it. Even I could talk to professors, and I was like, okay, in seriousness, how much of your learning did you do in class versus the night before the exam, or the 2 nights before the exam? Like, yeah, most of it was the 2 nights before the exam. It's or learning at your own pace, or learning in the computer lab while you're working on a program, or whatever it might be. So yeah, I think that is, when you realize how much time that frees up and how much more productive your time can be, then you do feel like you can start layering on more and more classes.
These sound like the lessons that you applied to the creation of Khan Academy.
Yeah, it wasn't part of like some grand plan that I was, 16 and I was thinking of how to what the school system should be like. But it is part of this, like, you grow up, you observe, and you have peers who, when you go and if you play chess with them, they eat your lunch. If you even a video game, you're like, that person just learns faster than I. But then for some reason in an algebra class, that person's struggling. Or once you get to you go to college, that person wanted to be an engineer or wanted to be a pre-med or whatever it might be, and they start struggling. And if there's 2 ways that you can observe that. You could just say, oh, well, maybe they're just not good at it, and some of us are good at it, and that's why we're meant to do it. Or you could say, no, there's something structurally weird happening, because if I objectively observe that person, they're very capable, they're very sharp, they're very impressive, and the more you observe, you realize it's mindset. A lot of people just literally psych themselves out of it. A lot of people were, there's all this work by Carol Dweck, growth mindset, fixed mindset. There's a lot of very smart people who have a fixed mindset where, they don't want to go into an environment where they might be challenged for fear of failure. And there's just a lot of people who are, I think, coming up not against their, when they start failing calculus, it's not because calculus is hard, but because they had an inadequate background in algebra. And once you're in calculus, it's very hard to remediate that.
Is there anything ultimately that you think the technology can't do? That is, any part of the current conventional educational experience as we understand it, that the approach you're taking can ultimately replace?
I think in the foreseeable future, there's a ton that technology won't be able to touch. I think getting mentored by a human being, taking interest. I think, like even with Nadia, my cousin, who's kind of, you could call her the first student of Khan Academy, I think 90% of that was the fact that her cousin, who was, at the time 25-year-old, had other things to do in his life, was calling her, seeing how she's doing, asking about her day. She could confide in me a little bit more. She felt I was closer to her age than her parents and understood the system a little bit more. That was 90% of it. And that's something that it'll be a very long time before, Siri catches up to that. Although my kids, anyway, but there's a story there. But the general idea is everything we talk about at Khan Academy isn't okay, how do we take technology and somehow try to replace or reduce the need for humans? It's actually how do we allow humans to do more of what humans are good at? So in my view, what Ms. Krause and Ms. Roussel did with me, which my other 6 teachers weren't and didn't have the opportunity. The other 6 teachers had 30 kids in a classroom, and the only model that they could execute on was, I will be up here, effectively on stage, I will disseminate some information. And there was, out of those 5 teachers, I would guess there's probably 2 or 3 of them that would have had trouble knowing my name because there were so many students in the class, and I was kind of, at the time, I wasn't notable in one way or the other. While Ms. Krause and Ms. Roussel, because a lot of the kids were working at their own time and pace on things, they had the time to have individual conversations with me, make me feel like I mattered. And so what we try to catalyze is classrooms where teachers don't have to spend as much time lecturing, don't have to spend as much time grading. They can differentiate instruction, and most of a teacher's time is spent next to students, mentoring them, coaching them, doing that thing that a computer will never be able to do, and setting up cultural frameworks in the classroom so that the students get to know each other and get to mentor each other.
I'm going to open it up to the audience in a minute. I want to ask you one question about the actual model for Khan Academy. I've heard you talk a number of times about the choice to make it a nonprofit, that you saw a chance, you've used the word epic, that you saw the chance to create a really durable, gigantic institution, something that would be having global impact 50 or 100 years from now. What I'm curious about, maybe it connects to your experience as a hedge fund analyst, what were the limitations that you saw in the for-profit model? That is, what are the limitations there that prevent that success on that kind of scale?
Yeah, and it's interesting because as a hedge fund, I was introduced as a hedge fund manager. I was a hedge fund analyst. I would dress differently if I was a hedge fund manager. But but as a hedge fund analyst, every day I was on the call with the management teams of publicly traded companies. And we were, if their growth was slowing from 30% to 29% from one quarter to another, we were digging into that. We were, there's no way that these guys could manage anything other than quarter to quarter because they had people like us calling them. And as much as everyone could say, and even we said we're long-term investors and we're looking, but it's hard in that lens where that even if we investors aren't caring about, other investors are going to care about this. They might have a more short-term view, et cetera, et cetera. So I guess I was a student of what incentives were. I was a student of understanding capital structure. I was a student of understanding board dynamics and all of these things. I mean, that's all I was doing for my days. And so when Khan Academy existed, when it started to exist, and before the hedge fund, before business school, after MIT I went to business school, but that intervening years I was out here in the Silicon Valley. I was at a bunch of tech startups. My real background is in tech. I also experienced that. I saw kind of your typical Silicon Valley kind of tech startup, the pluses and minuses of it. And I just felt that there's a couple of things. This thing is a labor of love. I always wanted it to exist. I saw what happens. A success story in Silicon Valley could be you get sold, but then even when the things that are successful and get sold, who knows what the next owner does with that resource? They might just shut it down. They might it just goes into a back room someplace, or they might put a pay gate in front of it. There's no way to control that. Even if you stay independent, who knows what happens when you pass away? Who takes over from there? What are their incentives? And so it felt, and Khan Academy is a strange beast, being kind of a tech thing in Silicon Valley, but at the same time being not for profit. That well, maybe there's a longer-term bet that we could make here and kind of create an institution. And when you really look at things that have been able to stay true to their mission over hundreds of years, and once again, very delusional idea for a guy operating out of a closet. But if you say, well, let's go through the thought experiment, They are not-for-profits. They are universities, things like that. And I don't know how many of y'all have read the Foundation series, Isaac Asimov. I don't know if y'all haven't. I actually envy you because then you can go home and read it because it's a very good book or a series of books. But when you read this guy, Harry Seldon, essentially he's an economist. He's this like psycho-mathematician, and he predicts the eventual downfall of the galactic empire. And he's able to predict mathematically that there's a high likelihood of a 10,000-year dark age, and he wants to shorten that dark age to a 1,000-year dark age by creating this foundation, which is all the world's knowledge. And when you read stuff like that, you're like, oh, this is awesome, this is a fun book. And you're like, well, how come we don't think on that scale? Like, why can't we start to think on scales of generations and what we can do for society? And when you think epic, that's the most epic scale you can think of, and that just felt like something, we all live once, so swing for the fences.
All right, let's go to the audience. I'll try to see where the mic. How old were you when you read Asimov?
I think the first time I must have been. I started maybe 12 or 13.
Oh.
Hey, Brett Auerbach here. Thanks for coming. I have 2 questions, so I'll let you pick the one that's more interesting.
That's good. I've never had that before. It's choice.
The first one is I've been very interested in math education and read a book called The Mathematician's Lament, and also been a part of a website called The Art of Problem Solving, which is for and also have been exposed to the learning method at Harvard Business School. And I was wondering how, in the online classroom, you can bring the active learning model that Art of Problem Solving and HBS apply without having teachers. And my second question is, having accumulated a lot of great degrees, how do you look at creating kind of standard tests or some kind of certification so someone who's taken the classes and excelled in them, who doesn't have the opportunity to go to those schools, can really show that the rest of the world that their education has met a certain standard of excellence?
Yeah, well, those are unfortunately both interesting questions. So I'll answer both of them. So on the first point, once again, I think we can. I hope Khan Academy is always thinking about what can we do with technology, and even on Khan Academy, I hope it's not. Even today, people are answering each other's questions. So this is really a human-to-human interaction that's facilitated by technology, and that's something that we hope to take much, much, much further in the future. I hope in 10 or 20 years, people are able to form human bonds to other humans on Khan Academy and have a feel of a cohort and all of the rest. But with that said, where we are now, I definitely don't believe that the Khan Academy can in any way touch the experience of sitting in a business school class and having a case discussion where you're able to converse and trade ideas, or going through a brainstorming session together, or having 5 people trying to joint problem solve something really, really interesting. And I think that's the point, is that for better or for worse, most classrooms, or for worse, most classrooms aren't able to focus on that stuff right now because they're so on the information delivery, on the, most classrooms don't look like a case discussion or Socratic dialogue. They don't look like people. They look like, literally 300 people and a couple people disseminating information. And so I think that's one of the values. If we could take that off the table, then that almost will hopefully force more physical environments to say, what can we do that the technology can't? And that's all this interesting stuff. And hopefully over time we can do more and more of that for the people who don't have access to a physical classroom. If you're in a village in India, you will be able to be in kind of a Socratic dialogue one day on Khan Academy somehow. We have to figure out how to do that. The second question, I think, is close to my heart, which is, the education, there's a learning piece to it. There's this kind of community piece to it, but then there's also this credentialing piece to it, which you're hitting on. And for a lot of people talk about the learning piece, but actually the credentialing piece is somewhat broken now. I mean, if someone walks up to, for those of y'all who are employers, and says, okay, I have a 4.0 GPA from, a university, and, a very small fraction of the population has a privilege of attending a university that's broadly known. If they went to a great university in their native country, or it's a regional university, and they're better than the kid who went to Harvard or Stanford or whatever else, it's very hard for any of us to say, well, I don't know how to compare this resume, or where do I put you in the interview process. And so I would love to see, and I hope we can help catalyze it in some ways, ways for anyone, regardless of how they learned it, regardless of where they attended and anything else, to prove what they know. And it's not you have some things like it right now, but they're kind of viewed as as not as good, like you could say like a GED or something like that. I want it to be in a world where it could be for the person who didn't have access, but they are just as good as a Stanford degree or a Harvard degree, so that those a few admissions decisions that were made when you were 17 or 18 don't dictate what happened later on.
Here we go.
Hi, I'm Eilif Tronson. I'm with a spin-out from SRI. Last time I heard you speak, Sal, you mentioned that you had a plan to start an actual school. So I was wondering how that is coming and what your plans are to actually get in the physical school buildings and build schools. If that's something that you really want to go into in a big way, or if it's more to have another kind of platform to look at learning processes on a small scale, and if you could talk a little bit about what you plan to do on that.
Yes. So I'll answer the second part first. So we don't have any intentions of doing. We have our hands full with Khan Academy. We want to do all the world's major languages, reach 100 million, billion people on Khan Academy, et cetera, et cetera. With that said, there is this view of, and even in our organization, we say, okay, we could reach 1 billion people one day or 100 million. That's huge impact. And if there's any donors in the audience, that by itself should make you feel very good about what we're doing. But it feels like society is ripe for also challenging the notion of the model of school. Some of y'all might have heard me talk about the Prussian education model, the factory model, which is kind of what our modern schools are essentially built after or modeled after. And so and through Khan Academy, we've essentially, some of what we're talking about now is students learning at their own pace, credentialing systems that are decoupled from learning systems. And so it's something that's very interesting to me. It's obviously complementary to Khan Academy. We've been partnering with a lot of excellent schools, and we're going to continue partnering with excellent schools. But there has been a thought, well, what if we, on a very, very small scale, created a lab where we had no constraints, so we could understand what is possible at least. And so we have set that up. It's actually downstairs from our offices, where we have a small group of kids essentially attending this research lab. It's 30 kids ages 5 to 12. They started 9 weeks ago. So we'll see where that goes.
All right, one more quick question. Is there?
Hi, I'm up here in the very far corner,
okay.
waving.
There you are.
Back here. Hi, how are you? I have a question. I have 2 kids in engineering college at Berkeley and Johns Hopkins, and they complain bitterly that college education engineering is legacy education, learning classes that are often outdated, professors who haven't been out of the classroom in 20 years. And so therefore, they go to Khan Academy and all sorts of other online courses to learn what they consider relevant, which is a little annoying for me paying $60,000 for their education.
Wow.
So I'd like to know, what can college education, especially in engineering, do to become more relevant, and how can Khan Academy and other online services contribute to that?
Yes. And if you would want to balance that $60,000, I'm sure you're stretched thin with the 60. But I studied engineering. I went to MIT, but I tell this to them, and they I think intellectually get it, but there's just so much history and whatever else. Engineering school, I would say all school, but engineering school especially. Engineering is about, by definition, it's about creating and doing. And any engineering program, you're going to do your students a much better service if the students come and the 4 years are essentially creating things and building a portfolio. Make it if you go to design school, to just have a GPA, people would think that's crazy. But engineering really is design, and design really is engineering. And so your transcript coming out of an engineering school should be the things that you've created, along with maybe some feedback from your professors and peers, and most of your time should be focused on that, with academic resources that are available on demand. Hey, I want to build this robot that can balance on one leg. Oh, I need to understand signal processing. Okay, let me go get some resources either from my professors or online on signal processing. Okay, to understand signal processing, I have to understand differential equations a little bit better or whatever. And so I should pull that to reach my goals. And and then when you come out, you'll have this portfolio. You'll actually be far more employable, and you'll actually just be you'll be in a much better position to engage in the world, because that behavior I just described. I want to build something. I want to create something, whether it's engineering project, it's a business, whatever it might be, and then pulling the resources as necessary. that is essentially the skill of the 21st century. So I know a lot of engineering schools are moving more in that direction, but I think it's going to happen faster. And I frankly think there's a lot of external catalysts. I mean, obviously we're talking about the online things, but we do have this, you know, a lot of kids go to these, you know, fairly high-priced, you know, good schools, but then they come out and then they'll go to this, you know, these accelerator, these things where they learn engineering or they learn design or they learn whatever else, which kind of shows that there's a, you know, the schools aren't fully, their product market fit isn't as strong as it should be.
All right, on that moment of challenge to Berkeley in particular, I guess we have to end. Thank you very much for your time.
Hey, thank you.